Hey everybody, welcome back. It's MJ from Just Plain Fun, and this video is about hand plane scarcity. And I've come up with this handy graphic, this handy spectrum to help illustrate the point. So we've got our rare planes, we've got our common planes, and in between we have our uncommon and our scarce planes. So in this video, I'm going to show you some different examples, and let's see where they fall on the spectrum. Just as a side note to our little spectrum here, I've been in and around the military almost my whole life, so I love a good acronym. So I took the first letter of each word, and I came up with kind of a pseudo acronym here, and it's rescue, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to rescue these planes, right? So rare, scarce, common, uncommon. You just ignore the E's there. How about a little sneak peek of what we're going to see in this video? We've got a Sargent number 708. We've got a Stanley number 2. And then I've got whatever's in this box. Whatever's in this box. One of the planes in this box. And the last one we're going to talk about is going to be this little guy. Our first plane that we're going to talk about is a Sargent number 708. And I consider this plane to be uncommon. If you're a Sargent collector and you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comments and don't hold back. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this plane apart, look at each component, and maybe get it cleaned up a little bit, and let's see if we can rescue this plane. As you can see, overall, this plane is in pretty decent condition. It's all there, which is a good start, and about the only apology on it is this tote is just completely jacked. The horn's busted and it's broken in half. Now, obviously, we might could get that fixed. However, that's not going to really help us in the short term. Maybe that can be a longer term project. But yeah, there's no cracks around the mouth, which is important. And other than that, it's just mostly just the usual dirt and grime and a little surface rust. But I don't see real bad pitting here anywhere. So I think this one's going to make a pretty nice project. In the interest of moving the video along, I did a couple things off camera. First of all, I took these 2 screws out, but just in case you ever take one of these apart, it's very, very simple. You can just pop the frog off like that. But I got I got my trusty toothbrush, and I went ahead and brushed off a lot of these parts. And one of the very first things I noticed when I was brushing this cap is this has actually been brazed. I cannot believe I didn't notice that before. But I guess without taking the cap off, you're probably not going to notice that. And you can see the evidence of the braze on the back as well. So it's perfectly serviceable. It'll be fine. However, it's obviously not going to get near the price that it would have if that cap was intact. And this actually brings us back to our scarcity discussion, because the less common the plane, or the more uncommon, maybe even scarce the plane is, the harder it's going to be, of course, to find parts for it. And that's just kind of the deal. Not only is it going to be harder to find them, but if you do find them, they're going to be more expensive. But another thing I did off camera was I kind of hit this with some sandpaper just to see what we're up against. How hard is it going to be to bring this blade back? And I've got a little rust spot right there, but overall, it's really not too bad. You can still read the Sargent and the 708 there. And let's see what else. The tote, of course, we talked about that being broken, so I checked my stash, and that really looks like an awful doggone close match. I think this base right here might just be a little bit thicker, possibly, like a little bit wider right here. But overall, I think this is going to be a really good match. And now I just have to figure out, am I going to use this good tote from my stash to rescue this plane that has a bad cap? And honestly, I probably will, just because these planes aren't terribly common, as we've already discussed. And I also took this to the wire wheel as well, and just got that outer layer of rust and everything off of there. I guess I should clarify something. This video is not going to be on restoring planes. I know I talked about rescuing planes, but I'm not going to be necessarily showing y'all, hey, this is how to restore a plane, because quite frankly, there's plenty of those videos out on the internet already. I will cover a couple of techniques and maybe give some recommendations, but I'm not going to go very far in depth with that kind of thing, especially not on this plane because of this cap being broken. That's part of the reason. But also, just generally speaking, when it comes to restoring hand planes, as a rule, if you're going to sell it, what you probably want to do is You want to clean it just enough. Use the least abrasive, gentlest methods possible and clean it just enough to where the next owner knows or can tell that there are no cracks on it. Which, of course, I have not actually done on this one as far as the body goes. But y'all get the idea of what I'm getting at. You want it to be clean enough, but never, never over cleaned. And you really don't want to kind of make it shine and polish it up, because that's actually going to limit your pool of potential buyers. So with this particular plane, I'm going to offer it to the patrons first, of course, because that's what I do. And I don't think any of them will buy it just because I don't think any of them are Sargent collectors. I do have a friend who is a Sargent collector who lives local to me, and I've already told him about this plane. I have not told him about the cap being brazed because I literally just realized that. But that's who I think it's going to go to. I think it's best suited to go into the hands of a Sargent collector, and that way maybe he's already got a cap and he can replace it, or he can keep an eye out for it. But I'll tell you, this is one plane that you're not going to see on the Lee Nielsen $5 challenge video or series, because I'm maybe not going to lose money. I'm definitely not going to make anything on this, and I might lose a few bucks, especially considering that I had to take this out of my stock to make that complete. Overall, I think it's still a decent, it can be a good user working plane. And like I said, patrons, if any of y'all happen to want to add a Sargent auto set, let me know. Let's get into one of those boxes that I showed y'all at the beginning of the video. Recognize that? That is a number 45, but now let's take a closer look and see if we can figure out what type it is. So much to talk about on this one, but before we go any further, I do have to send a shout out to my friend Mike out in Oklahoma, because he's the one that picked these up from the seller for me and sent them out. And I'm saying these because there's more than one plane in this box. But for those of you that have watched my shorts and you watched the one on being able to identify type 1 through type 3 45, number 45s, what do we have here? You should recognize that one on site. So we've got the floral pattern, but then we've got Stanley back here. So if you said type 2, give yourself a pat on the back. You are correct. And this one, we're going to say is uncommon. Definitely not, probably not any more than that. However, what can move the needle from uncommon a little bit further up the scarcity line on the spectrum is when a plane like this is complete. So when it has the depth stop, when it has the slitter and the slitter depth stop, when it has this brass nut back here, that is when you can start talking about, oh, and a set of blades. That's when you can start moving it, maybe a little bit, inching it toward the scarce department. Now, with all that said, this is an older one, and this slitter should have a patent date, which this one does not. So I'm glad to get another slitter that does not have a patent date, because I was actually running low on those. But I'm going to have to put, if I want to sell this as a complete plane, I'm going to have to put a patented slitter on it in order to make it type correct. So here we go. No patent date. It would have had an 1882 patent date on there if it was original, and that's okay. Now, the most remarkable thing about this plane, and maybe this is just me, because the average person might not say, oh, that's remarkable, is you would look at this and you go, okay, it's a set of blades. It doesn't have notches back there. That's a good set of blades, right? Well, here's what's funny. This is actually a set from a number 50. I did not notice that in the pictures when I was looking at this plane. And it's okay, because just like with that slitter, I can use a set of blades for a number 50, or maybe one of you can use a set of blades for a number 50. But the way that we know that is, see how short that is? This is an actual blade from a 45. So notchless, because it's that age of 45. And I promise that this blade did not get sharpened so many times that it got short. I mean, these are number 50 blades. They're all the same length there. And the one that's in the plane, oddly enough, is also a longer one. So chances are when this plane was last put away after it was last used, it probably had this blade in it. This is what they were using, although I don't know what they were cutting. That's not very sharp. And this is one that I had in my stash. So just a little interesting there that it looks complete from the aerial view, but that's not the right blades. Wait a minute. that's not a daggone hand plane. This one was in the box too, so thanks for that too, Mike. That's a little Sheffield cast steel. What is that? Sheffield Sawworks. I mean, that's a pretty nice little back saw. And I've got an affinity for these. I mean, look at that handle. It's all intact and everything. Anyway, let's get back to hand planes. How about that little guy, huh? Patented 1886. That is one old tool. If you're not familiar with these, this is a Miller's patent, or at least it's part of a Miller's patent. It does have the fence, and the fence is intact, and that's a good thing. But it's missing quite a bit here. It's missing, of course, depth stop slitter. It's only got one blade, and originally this would have had a fillet stir bed that would have attached in the middle there. So this one is, like so many others, is incomplete. We're going to call this one closer to scarce. It's a little more than uncommon, and it's somewhere on that spectrum between uncommon and scarce. If it had all of the parts, then it would definitely be scarce and maybe even approaching rare. And somebody who's a really big Miller's patent aficionado will come in the comments and they will let me know if I'm way off base on that. But Miller's patent, very old, and we're going to call it bordering on scarce. Y'all are not going to believe this one. This is actually how I received this plane in the mail. This is the danger of buying things off of Marketplace. Like, this hole in the back box was already there. And so I just reached in there and I tore it open like this. But I kid you not, this is how I received this plane. So there was no packing material, no nothing in there. Obviously, it was able to bounce around and move around as much as it felt like, which is probably how the box got torn. But Lord help us, this thing actually survived, if you can believe that. I mean, it's got a little ding here and there, but this thing is just destined to be a user. It's destined to be user grade anyway, so I'm not going to stress about it too much. But if you don't recognize this one, I think most of y'all probably do. It is a number 72 chamfer planes. There we go, number 72. So, and as you can see, this one is missing the tote. And then check out that amazing brazing job on that lever cap. I mean, have you ever seen anything quite so nice? And then this blade, believe it or not, these blades are extremely hard to come by. It looks like a block plane blade, but there's no grooves on the back for adjustment back there. And not to mention, this thing on a 72 is actually, it sits beveled down in the plane versus bevel up, which is also unusual. Having this groove in the blade like that is a new one on me. The only thing I can figure is maybe the screw was really tight, and when they were adjusting it back and forth, somehow it wore that groove in there. But overall, I think the blade is still serviceable. I think it'll still take an edge, and it can still be a good user. And this plane, like we already mentioned, is also, it's going to make a good user. I think y'all have heard me say that before. But in order to do that, we're going to need a tote for it. And I think most people, if they're going to be serious about buying this, are probably going to want a better looking cap. So let's see what we can do. Being a parts guy, I tend to have parts around from time to time, as one can imagine. This cap right here, I actually traded for from somebody. I traded a 40.5 cap for it, as I recall. Got the B casting back there, which may or may not actually match this plane. Probably not. And then what's really, really weird about this cap, you guys tell me if you've ever, guys and gals, tell me if you've ever seen this before. What is going on with that? Like, what was Stanley doing? Was that made on a Friday and the dudes were trying to get out of there to go watch a baseball game or something? I don't know. Very strange, but I think it will still work. So let's go ahead and put this cap on and see what we've got. And I think, just to keep it kind of more original maybe, let's go ahead and move this screw over. And plus, this screw right here doesn't actually match the B casting anyway, because this is a later style of screw, whereas this one is an earlier one. And the reason why I say I don't think it matches with the B casting is because I think there would be a patent date or patent info back here, if I remember right. I haven't looked at the 72s lately. I don't know if there is even an official type study. There probably is somewhere. But yeah, I can already tell that cap is looking 100% better, even though it's not cleaned up. I think that's a heck of a lot better look. And now we just need a tote for this bad boy. And we're over to the tote shelf. This is probably the most totes that I've had in stock at one time, maybe ever. But they're not all serviceable. So for example, this one is busted and still needs to be repaired. I've got some others that are already repaired. If you happen to need a tote and you see one you like, make sure you let me know. Like for example, this one's got this hairline. Maybe you want to take a crack at repairing that. But we need a tote for this number 72. So what do y'all think? Which one do you like? Me personally, I'm leaning toward that nice striped one right there. And this is actually from Dave Corinth. That's a reproduction that was made. And you may have even seen the video on that. But it's from Corinth Toolworks. And I'm going to grab one more tote because I want to show y'all something else on the 72 when we get back to the bench. The tricky part of finding a tote for a 72 is finding one that doesn't have that long toe. So right there you can see where the toe is overhanging the front of that. And most people don't particularly care for that. It's one of the things when you're out shopping, say you go to like an MWTCA meet or something, and you find a 72, you got your eye on it. It's something you always want to look for because just like any other plane, the totes tend to get broken. And so just something to keep in mind. This one right here, it doesn't fill the whole thing out. It doesn't go all the way to the front. But I personally like that look a lot better than especially one overhanging. And I mean, that definitely works for me. And keep in mind that this is a user grade number 72. And as a matter of fact, I think that looks like the bead. It looks like a bead on the front of that. So that's probably from, like, say, a number 3 or possibly a number 4, like a type 5 that has that bead, if that's what that even is. But I'm inclined to go ahead and leave that knob on there just because I kind of like the way that it looks. And unlike some other folks that I know, I'm not really too worried about those matching super close. That doesn't really bother me too much. However, if a buyer is like, hey, MJ, I want to have a knob that looks better with that tote, that looks nicer, I could easily replace that. But for now, I'm going to leave it as is. Now, I don't want this video to end up being crazy long and I'm losing viewers. So I'm not going to show y'all the whole process of what I did to find a screw that would work. I'm just going to show you the end result. Notice how that has that crazy bend in it, right? So what I found with this particular plane is I was having a hard time getting the toe of this tote to sit down even. And so I did a whole nother video on this, which you can find in my library. I think it's, I got 99 problems, but a tote screw is not one, or tote screw ain't one. So if you want to learn more about that or see kind of more about my take on that, I encourage you, of course, to check out that video. And incidentally, this one is not cooperating right now. I should probably edit this out. But if you're still watching to this point, you probably enjoy my little diatribes. So let's go ahead and just keep this rolling and see what we can do. Okay, so we've got that toe sitting down flat on there. And of course you saw that I just put the screw in there first and then slid the tote down over top of it. That's something that you're going to have to do occasionally if you're having trouble getting it to work, or if you've got a screw that's bent, say for example, and you can't seem to get it, you don't want to straighten it out, you don't want to risk breaking it, or you don't have a replacement that's straight, whatever the case might be. And I do still have a just tiny gap right there, but honestly, I'm probably not going to worry too much about that, because when you go to use the plane, just forward pressure on that is going to keep it fine. And then it's not moving back and forth because it's got that little hole in the bottom and it's got the little nib that sticks up. So I'm pretty comfortable with this as is. And I like the look. Of course, I like Dave Corinth's totes. And so I'm pretty comfortable with that. Somebody else might not be. I've heard tale and I've seen folks that have put like a really thin either piece of paper or a piece of leather or something in there to kind of shim underneath that. But for a user grade 72, to put a chamfer on a board and to be able to do it without spending a ton of money, I think this one's going to do the trick. We're going to call this guy uncommon as it sits. If it's in kind of minty condition, I think we can start looking at maybe calling it scarce, possibly depending on the type. And then if we start talking about the bullnose attachment and we start talking about the beading attachment for this thing, then if you've got a complete one that has all the bells and whistles, you're probably getting well past scarce and maybe even approaching rare. Obviously, that's not the case for this one right here. As I'm sure you've noticed, we're not really doing much for bench planes because most of your bench planes are going to be in that common category, and we're not really talking too much common stuff here. So we're more in the specialty planes kind of realm. So let's pull these two out and see what we've got. And what do we have here? It's a number 62. It's a low angle jack. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but once again, this one is what I would consider uncommon. And then if you can find one that doesn't have a chip on the mouth or any cracks here, then you're automatically into the scarce category. Because I'm telling you, it's probably 80% of the ones that I've seen. Not that I see these all the time, but 80% of the ones that I see are either cracked or chipped or worse, or the whole thing is just completely blown out. And of course, a lot of times they're missing parts. So I had a friend of mine / customer that reached out, a couple weeks ago, and he was like, "Hey, I found this at an antique mall. It's a decent price, but it's missing the lever cap. How often do you come across a lever cap?" And I gave him the standard answer that I give to folks, which is I might see 2 or 3 in the next month, or I might not see one for 6 months or longer. And that's just the nature of the beast with antique tools. And I mean, case in point, this eccentric lever, I can't tell you how many times I've seen 62s or heard of 62s that were missing this. And I guarantee there's somebody or multiple somebodies that are watching this video right now that are like, "Hey, I could use that." And so even though it's, had its better days, little pitting there, somebody is looking for that and would be happy to have that on their plane. And this one, I mean, unfortunately, it's going to have to be parted out because, for one thing, this thing is frozen solid. And, of course, this knob right here is busted off of there. This toe, I don't think is original. I'm pretty sure the toe, even though that probably looks short, the toe is actually supposed to be even further back. It's a it's kind of it's a pretty short one. Let's leave it at that. And then the blade, I mean, maybe this could still be saved. It would take some work. I got some pitting and stuff back here. But I definitely don't regret buying this because, I mean, it's still got some decent parts on it. The eccentric's acceptable. This knob, even though it's cracked here, there's probably somebody that could use that as well. And for that matter, even this mouth plate, I mean, that might still be able to be employed somewhere. But what's crazy is, heard about this plane. I asked the gentleman to go ahead and buy it and send it to me, which he did. And so if you happen to be watching, thank you. But what's crazy is within a week of me buying this plane, before I even got it, I was out in the western part of Virginia, and I came across another number 62 parts plane. It was crazy. And unfortunately, it had even fewer good parts on it than this one. It didn't have an eccentric ring, and they wanted $90 for it, so I had to pass on it. But it did have a lever cap, and so if the price had been a little better, I could have gone ahead and invested in that one and gotten a lever cap. Now, I wouldn't have rebuilt this one anyway for all the reasons that I just mentioned, but especially that. But incidentally, if you're looking at a 62, honestly, get one for your collection to put on the shelf, but don't use it because the mouth on those is so weak. If you're wanting a 62, if you're wanting a low angle jack, just go ahead and bite the bullet and invest in a Lie-Nielsen. So the improvements in metallurgy that we've made over the last 100 years, and then just the improvements that Lie-Nielsen has made, this is really the way to go. The mouth on it is stronger, and if you want a low angle jack, I can't endorse it enough. And no, I'm not being paid by Lie-Nielsen to say this, but get yourself a Lie-Nielsen. Speaking of the insanity, this is like being on that show on the History Channel, Pawn Stars, where you never know what's going to come through the door. I'm sure most of y'all have probably seen that. This all happened within the same week. Remember I said you might see 2 in the next week. You might not see some for 6 months. Lo and behold, had somebody reach out to me and they said, "Hey, I got this 62. You want to trade for it?" So this thing is obviously pretty rough. It's seen much, much better days, but who knows? Maybe underneath all of that pitting and that rust and everything, maybe there's a savable plane there. I mean, this thing is pretty locked up. So it's not going to be today, but look at that. It's actually appears to have a clean mouth on this thing. So this one might just be worth putting the time and effort into to try to save it. So who knows? Maybe the knob off of this one needs to move over here and maybe put the time into it. As rusted as this thing is, I bet you the wood probably just more or less disintegrated off of this thing. It looks like it spent entirely too long outside. But yeah, look at that. What might be a clean mouth. You just don't see that very often. The same gentleman that found that 62 and sent it to me, he found it at the antique store, the first 62 I showed you. This one was also there. Don't be confused by the 62. This is a 10.5. But what's unique about this 10.5 and what makes it 100% scarce, without question, this is a scarce plane, is the fact that it is a Type 1. So the Type 1s were the only ones you can see where it used to have a mouth plate here, and then it had a knob and all that. So an adjustable mouth on it, and it was only on the Type 1s that they did that with the 10.5. Now, somewhere out there, hopefully somebody watching this video, you either have a Type 1 body that's cracked and maybe has been repaired, and you need this, or you have a cracked one and you have a spare mouth and a spare knob, and you wouldn't mind maybe either doing some trading or sell it to me, because I would love to rebuild this plane. I think I have a frog that would work with it. I bet you I have a tote. What I don't have is that mouthpiece and then the special knob that attaches, the hardware that attaches to that. I could probably come up with a blade. I know for sure I have a Type 1 chip breaker, which is also different. But if you're that person that has the parts and you want to chat, definitely hit me up. Let's talk about this numero dos. So I took this little guy in trade at a vintage market that happened right here in my town, right near my house actually. And it's a really, really nice plane. It's got a ton of potential. It does have a couple of apologies, if you will. So the first thing, other than this crack right here, is that it's got the bead. That's a very pronounced bead. That is definitely a Type 5 knob. Type 5 number 2 knob. And obviously not original for this plane. It's just not a Type 5. But the tote is pretty decent. It does have this hole back here in the back, so I'm going to have to decide if I want to try to either fill that somehow, patch it, or maybe replace the tote. I got to figure that out. Definitely need to figure something out with this knob, I think. And then I've got this V logo blade with it, which means that I would need a plain cap, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And the blade looks decent enough, but if I do decide to go ahead and replace that blade, I've got options. And incidentally, if you happen to need a number 2 blade, I've got options. So make sure you let me know. So let's talk about this cap for a second. Whenever you see one of these little dimples, nibs, whatever you might want to call that, that's sticking up, you know that that is not a real Stanley cap. It may have been made by Stanley, and it's made in the Stanley design, but that right there, that is not a Stanley cap that you're going to see on, say, the Bailey design, which to differentiate from a Bedrock. Now, oddly enough, I have some number 2 caps in right now. This one, not a Stanley, but at least it doesn't have the little dimple on there. That's either some other brand or made by Stanley, but for something else, I don't know. And then this one has got the little chip in the corner there. And I'm partially showing you this because I'm like, hey, I got options. And also because if you happen to need a cap, a user grade cap, y'all can feel free to reach out and let me know. This one came off of a nasty number 2, and this was one of the better parts on it. And it does have that thin layer. It's almost like it's textured there. And so I don't know whether to smooth that out or what, but at least it doesn't have any chips along the leading edge. This is off of a 6 Alpha, which is what that little nib again signifies there. And it's in decent enough shape. I mean, it's a great user cap, but with it being a 6 Alpha, obviously it's not going to make this plane type correct. So I got to figure out what I'm going to do with that. And I think I actually have one more cap around here, but this is a great project. Most of your number 2 planes are going to be squarely in the uncommon category. Some people might be surprised by that. They might say, well, how come they cost so much if they're just uncommon? I can assure you there are a ton of number twos out there, but they're desirable. They're fun to collect. Lots of people like them. So it's a good old-fashioned supply and demand is what drives the cost on these, because people just like them. I think there's a number of people that actually like twos better than ones, but that's off on another story. I do want to go ahead and point out, though, that Dave Corinth is actually working on some number two furniture for me. And so once that becomes available, I may very well put a set on here. Let me show you a picture. This is a little sneak preview of some of what he's working on. And like I said, it may end up on there. But let me show you one other thing that will help move a number two from uncommon up to scarce. If you want to take a number two from uncommon to scarce, you just got to have some corrugations on the sole, because there's just flat not too many of those out there. This is, of course, one of the ones out of my personal collection, and y'all may have seen it in another video, but for anybody who hasn't, we're going to call that scarce. So this number two is going to get rescued. Getting back to that theme for this video, it's just not going to be today because I don't have the toting knobs from Dave yet, and I got to figure out what I'm going to do with this lever cap. But it is going to get rescued, and it is going to be available. So patrons, if any of y'all have been thinking about adding a number two to the lineup, let me know. You just can't make this stuff up, folks. This video was already in what the people who are good at YouTube call post-production when I got this plane in the mail. And y'all are not going to believe this, but it's another little 2C. So it's Type 10 era, because they briefly stopped putting number two up on the toe for whatever reason during what we now call Type 10. And this thing has got problems. I mean, it's got problems, y'all. Broken tote. I don't know what's going on with this blade, but it's not even a real Stanley blade. It's somebody's homebrew that's shop built or something. Of course, the lateral's missing. The tote, excuse me, the knob has one of the more interesting repairs that I've ever seen. But I mean, honestly, it's so cool. Maybe I'll just leave it as is. And then look at that. I mean, this must be the theme of this video. The other theme is busted lever caps. What am I even going to do with this thing? So, but you know, it's a 2C, and the jury's still out whether that is actually a crack or not. What do y'all think? I think it is, unfortunately. And we have got 2 planes left for me to show y'all. And you know, I always save the best for last. And if I'm coming in after a number 2, and I can tell you it's not a number 1, then you know it's got to be something good. So let's see what's hiding in this box. Oh, look at that. Oh, wait, just kidding. I promise it's not any of these planes. This is one of those deals where if you wanted the one that you had your eye on, you had to take them all. What do y'all think of that? Good old Union X. A number 5 there. Now, y'all know, if you've seen basically any of my videos, you know that I'm a Stanley guy through and through. I am not a Union guy. So I don't know a ton about these, but I know what I've seen online. I know I've seen how people react, if you will, when these come around. I am purely speculating here when I say this, but I think that the X models are scarce, and there's going to be more than one Union person or X collector or whatever in the comments that's going to correct me on that if I'm wrong, and they're going to let me know that, hey, they're not scarce, they're uncommon, or whatever the case may be. But based on what I've seen and just the lack of these available that I've seen, I'm going to call it scarce. Now, this one is pretty rough. I mean, I did not notice this in the pictures, but I mean, that is some pretty aggressive, pretty deep pitting there. And the sole is actually even worse. I mean, maybe somebody with enough time on their hands could maybe bring that back. But I mean, that's bad. I mean, that rust has gotten in there real bad. But the good news is it looks like it's got some good parts up top. So even if this does end up being a part out, which based on that sole, I think you're either going to have to replace that sole and put the good parts on it, or just sell the good parts up top. But the good news is there's still plenty of value there. And for that vertical post, just in case you're not familiar with it, that's how you're going to adjust the depth of cut on that. And let me see if I can get this lever cap off and we can take a closer look. I've got my handy soft jaw pliers. If you don't have a set of these, I highly encourage you to get some, because you can grab a hold of things like this and turn them without hurting, without tearing up like the knurling that's on the side of them, for example. And I mean, look at that corrosion. That's just that's some wild stuff right there. But hey, at least the cap is intact. There's no damage along the leading edge, so we got that going for us. So yeah, vertical post. Instead of the yoke coming through like it does on a lot of other planes up here near the top, the chip breaker on these is unique. The opening is much further down, and so that's what allows you to use that vertical post in order to raise and lower the blade there. So pretty cool stuff there. Little Union X. I'm not going to try and get too philosophical about these just because I don't know too terribly much about them, but I wanted to include it in the video just based on what I perceive as the scarcity of them. And if you happen to be a Union X guy and you need any of these parts, you know the deal. We saved the best for last. And there it is, folks. It's a little Bedrock. And more specifically, it's a 605 and a quarter. This thing was only made, this is per Walters, was only made from 1925 to 1943. So less than 20 years in production. And this is by far the scarcest of all the Bedrock planes. And I am fully prepared to call this thing rare. And if anybody wants to come in the comments and fight me, I'm more than happy to do that. This is exactly as I got it. This was how it was advertised. Well, let me back up. It was advertised as a 605 and a half. But those of us with a sharp eye were able to see that it was a 605 and a quarter. And this is how it came to me. So we're going to have to, in order to rescue this plane, we're going to have to find those parts to make it right. And we're back over to the Shelf O Totes. And I think because this plane was built and then or was manufactured in the 1920s, I think we want a light colored rosewood because that's what Stanley tended to use. So I think this one right here is a winner. It's intact. It looks decent. It's a fairly valuable plane, so we want to put a good one on there. Let's see if it matches the color on our knob. Good googly moogly, that's a lot of parts. Anybody need a lever cap? All right, so back on track here. Number 3 size, aka 605 and a quarter size, Stanley keyhole cap. That's what we need. I think we've got a winner right here. It's clean enough. It's got a good leading edge. Let's give it a shot. And onto our number 3 size blades. Over here on the left, we've got our older ones. Middle is a Sweetheart. Over on the right is going to be our BB logos, the later ones. This is probably the best Sweetheart blade that I have for a number 3 size. It's not perfect. It's got that little bend up there, but it's the best that I still have because I sold some good ones. And this is going to have to do until I can get a better one. It does have a good mating surface between the chip breaker and the blade. And so I say we let it ride. Let's check our color match here. It's not great. I might have to see if I can find a better knob than that or a better color match. But let's go ahead and do this for now. Let's go ahead and put this tote on. And then maybe off camera or before I go to sell this thing, I'll go ahead and see if I can find a better color match. But I did forget to mention that this plane does have one major apology. And it's this little guy right here, this little chip right here on the back of the mouth. So with it being as rare as it is, I'm comfortable with it. I'm definitely comfortable selling it like that. But I'm even comfortable putting money into making it complete, obviously, despite that little chip there, because there's just not that many of these out there. So let's go ahead and throw this blade on there. And just in case you happen to be wondering, if you're thinking, it's a Bedrock, it should have a Bedrock lever cap. This is actually a later one based on the single patent date back there, and also based on when they actually started making the 605 and a quarter. So there is no 605 and a quarter that would have originally had a Bedrock cap, a cap that said Bedrock on the front of it. So that is definitely the correct cap. And I like the idea of putting just some user grade parts on there, again, because of the little chip there. And there are probably multiple someones out there who don't have a 605 and a quarter in their collection at all, and would be perfectly happy to pay, say, $450 for this plane, even in the condition that it's in, just so that they can fill that hole. And they don't want to spend $500 or $600 or more to get a really, really nice one. They'd be perfectly happy with something that's more user grade. Hey y'all, I really appreciate you watching the video. If you made it to this point, then good on you. That is outstanding. And I want to send a special thanks and a huge shout out to all of my patrons Y'all are the ones that are keeping this thing going, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you.